So, welcome. Creation stories around the world have remarkable similarities in their myths about how we and our earth came into being. From the many stories that I'll be sharing with you today, and they're really interesting, I'd like to introduce you to a series of symbols found in an ancient manuscript that Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, one of the founders of the Theosophical Society, talks about in her major work, The Secret Doctrine. The manuscript was made of black palm leaf pages with white symbols, which will serve as an outline for what I will be sharing with you today. The first page is a circle on a black background, and this represents the unity from which all proceed and return. Blavatsky, referring to the white circle, wrote about Pascal, quoting Hermes Trismegistus, God is a sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. This state is written about in Genesis in the Bible as darkness was upon the face of the deep. And you're going to see this reference to darkness is very common. The ancient verses that Blavatsky wrote about in The Secret Doctrine, and they're called the stanzas of Dizyan, refers to it as the darkness that breathes over the slumbering waters of life. Now, waters will also be very common, as well as the breathing that is mentioned here, and there's no manifestation at this point. Egyptian mythology has a pair of gods that represent this, Kuk and Kauket, the god and goddess of darkness. This darkness has been called chaos, the abyss, the great deep, nothingness, and the primeval waters. These primordial waters are represented by the Egyptian god Nun, who lifts the ship of the sun god Ra at the moment of creation. So you can see in the picture the god Nun with his arms holding up the ship of manifestation. In the Bible, there's a corresponding verse in Genesis, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Now, there are many more quotes that I could include here, but not to have my talk be too lengthy, I only selected a few to show you how common these metaphors are for the beginning of creation. The second page of Blavatsky's manuscript shows the same circle with a point in the center, and this is the start of manifestation, and it is commonly referred to as the light. In Genesis, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And then from Zarathustra, the author of the Holy Book of the Zoroastrians, he, Mazda, or their term for their deity or God, first created by means of his own light. The third page of the manuscript has a center point extending to a diameter drawn horizontally, and this is the divine feminine. Then added to this is the vertical diameter, the divine masculine, making a cross in the circle. So this represents a duality of life. The picture on the right creatively depicts the duality with the sun and the moon placed where the little dots would be on the yin-yang symbol. This duality, as symbolized by the male and female with light and darkness, is needed for manifestation. Just having light or darkness alone is homogeneous. So things start with darkness in pralaya, nothingness. Then when we have creation, we need both light and we need to keep the dark to make distinctions of form. Both are necessary, for dark makes shadows and allows contrasts for life to be fully experienced. This is illustrated in China's Book of the Yellow Emperor, using the metaphors of the mysterious female or the valley, which contains the valley spirit, the masculine. So this makes the duality here. The valley is hollow and limitless, so it can embrace and nourish spirit. Its origin is from the not born that gives birth to everything. Spirit continues forever and cannot be used up. So this spirit is Blavatsky's one life. That's the circle on the black background. Then the 5th page of the manuscript is where the circle disappears as it marks the beginning of physical manifestation. The female Chinese valley that nourishes the valley spirit represents earth. And many creation stories have manifestations starting with earth or clay. We see this in the Bible. God makes the heavens and the earth and then makes man out of dust from the ground. Then he breathes the breath of life into his nostrils. So to illustrate how aligned the earth is within a human being, the earth is made of 5 major components, and you'll see they are all in a human body. The first is water, and we know the body is over half water and more than that in some organs. The second consists of minerals, such as iron, calcium, and magnesium, all in the body. The third component is organic matter, such as decayed leaves, which were once alive. And the human body is alive and organic, having the carbon atom as its basis. So I love chemistry, so you'll see this little bit of a departure here. The 4th component of earth is that it contains organisms. In soil, it might be worms, and in the human being, we have normal bacteria and other microbes in our digestive tract, as well as other places. Lastly, the earth and the human are made of gases, such as carbon dioxide and methane gas. So the earth's crust is made of the elements that you see in the pie chart: oxygen, silicon, aluminum, iron, calcium, sodium, and magnesium, as well as others. And they're all in the human body, as shown in this periodic table, which has the percent composition of all the elements in the body, and they're highlighted in color. And you can see how many there are. And we even have radioactive elements. I placed a star over those which were in the previous pie chart, and I listed them on the left, the major elements of the Earth's crust. So you can see we are really made of earth. Also, the very word human comes from humus, meaning earth. Compost breaks down and eventually makes humus. In the Mexican ancient manuscript, the Popol Vuh, man is created out of mud or clay taken from under the waters. The picture on the right is an artist's depiction of the making of a human being, and the picture on the lower left is from the manuscript. The faces on the top left come from archaeological ruins. In the Islamic Quran, the Lord said to the angels, "I'm going to create a man of clay, of smooth mud, and breathe into him his soul." The Pima Native Americans tell of man-maker, the magician, making human beings out of earth and letting them cook in the sun. But Coyote keeps interfering and giving bad advice about how long to leave them out. They come out either too light or too dark. When man-maker stops listening to Coyote, the people come out the beautiful color of the Pueblo Native Americans. So many creation stories use the metaphor of a cosmic egg to begin manifestation. And this is the white circle with a dot in the center. This slide is the Egyptian cosmic egg, bringing forth the sun god Ra. And he had the head of a falcon with the sun disk inside a cobra on his head. And the cobra and the falcon are signs of deity. The Egyptian god of chaos, He, also has an egg on his head. The cosmic egg in many creation stories is hatched from a cosmic bird, like a swan or a goose, possibly because they're seen as big enough to begin manifestation. And this is illustrated by the Hindu mysterious bird, the swan, the Kalahamsa, who comes from chaos and who gives birth to the golden egg, the Brahmanda, which opens for Brahma, the creator god, for him to make the heavens and the earth. The picture on the left is a tile of the Hamsa bird with the flowery tail, and the picture on the right illustrates Brahma on the swan. Kalahamsa, with Brahma having 4 faces denoting the 4 elements and the 4 cardinal points of direction for our earth. And we'll get to this story later. The Greek Nix is also another bird of creation and is painted on these pottery pictures, which are in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And the horses represent the 4 elements as well as other things in the story. An interesting twist on this is in the Australian Aboriginal story that says that at first there are only animals. One day, an emu and a crane fight, and in anger, the crane snatches the emu's enormous egg and out of its nest and hurls it into the sky. It bursts open and the yolk forms a great fire, which becomes the sun. These pictures are various artists' rendition of the story theme. In the poem of creation from Finland called the Kalevala, and that means creation of heaven and earth, a golden-eyed duck builds a nest, and she lays 6 golden eggs with the 7th one of iron, and they tumble into the sea and crack open. The lower half of one egg becomes the earth, and the egg yolk makes the sun, and the egg white gleams palely as the moon. The 7th egg of iron gives rise to the world, with iron symbolic of the density of the physical plane, as well as iron in the blood of humans and most creatures. Iron can also represent the difficulties we have in life that can make life feel heavy, like iron or lead. The mythology of Japan says that everything originated out of an ocean of mud and water. From the mud, a god is created. From a seed that grows into a plant that gets so tall it reaches the clouds in heaven. The god is lonely, so he creates more gods, including Izanagi and Izanami, male and female. So you can see the duality again. One day, they become curious about what is beneath the ocean of mud. So Izanagi takes his staff and jabs it into the ocean. When he picks it back up, the lumps of earth fall into the water and become the islands of Japan. These next couple stories illustrate the start of creation of a human being. The Naga tribe of the Himalayas has the first man being created, who then becomes lonely and asks God for a companion. God tries to make a woman out of the earth, but he isn't satisfied with it, and he calls it a tiger. The second attempt still isn't good, and God calls this one an elephant. He creates all the animals of earth this way. After trying so hard to make a woman, God grows tired and sits by a pond to rest. Seeing his reflection in the water, he touches it, and instantly he creates woman. And man and woman fall in love right away and continue with the creation of humanity. A similar story is from Africa that says long ago, two spirit people were sneezed out of the mouth of the Creator. The woman, Ayadola, becomes lonely and decides to make more people for the earth. And she builds a great fire and bakes up batches of clay babies, with each one having its own shade of color. And these make up the various races of the people on earth. So these two stories that I just shared, where the God touches the water to create a woman, along with the Creator who sneezes out the first humans, exemplifies Blavatsky's esoteric description of the first root race, her term for the first wave of humanity called the self-born. And they come from celestial beings or the angelic kingdom. And these are called Dhyani Chohans through the use of their will. And we are taught that they threw off or projected their shadows or their astral bodies to make the spiritual form for humanity. They exuded these forms, which were very ethereal and spiritual. To describe the way this took place, HPB similarized it to what occurred with mediums at a seance. When Blavatsky wrote her book in 1888, spiritualism was very popular, and people were going to mediums to try to make contact with a relative who had died. Blavatsky observed these and said the materialized forms sometimes would ooze out of the bodies of certain mediums, and they usually just vanished, but she said they could be made more solid. The picture on the left depicts the etheric body of a human, which is the substance that Blavatsky observed, which makes the first root race. Now, this isn't a race at all like we know it today, but just Blavatsky's term for the first level of creation of humanity. This division from the Dhyani Chohans, or the angels, is similar to fission, one making two, or how the single-celled organism, the amoeba, makes a second amoeba. Another creation story follows a similar theme, and that is from the Hindu story that Blavatsky makes reference to in the Secret Doctrine. And that's of Samya, the wife of Surya, the Hindu sun god and creator of the universe. So the story goes that Samya was unable to endure the fervors of her lord, or another version says she grew tired of his brilliant light. So she retired to the jungle to perform religious devotions, or tapas. She left for her husband, her handmaiden, her etheric double, and this is the first root race. And Surya, the sun, thought this was his wife. Then the story goes, the sun and the etheric double, the handmaiden, go on to have many children to create humanity. Another story with a similar theme tells of the Egyptian creator god Atum, or Amun, who spits out Shu and Tefnut from his mouth. The first human being in the Christian and Jewish tradition is Adam. And the word Adam means without blood, with the A meaning without and dam meaning blood. This represents that there's no physical means to create human beings at this stage because it's still very ethereal and spiritual. Proceeding onward with manifestation, Blavatsky teaches us that the second root race, or wave of humanity, develops from the first in a manner of procreation called budding, or sweat-born, because it comes directly from the original. Sea anemones have their offspring this way. And so you can see the larger parent anemones with their offspring growing on them, who will eventually separate and grow on their own. So this is illustrated in the Bible by Eve being created from Adam's rib. Another similar story from Hinduism is that of Kandu, an eminent sage. Because of his stature, Kandu awakened the jealousy of the other gods, so Indra, the king of the gods, sent one of his female nymphs to tempt him. Her name was Pramloka, and she seduced Kandu. When Kandu awakened from his infatuation, he became flustered and angry, which scared Pramloka so that she flew away. As she left, she brushed up against the leaves of the trees she passed, and the perspiration from her body came off on the leaves. All of the drops of perspiration created her child, Marisha, the sweatborn. That's the second root race or wave of humanity. And Marisha goes on to have other children who people the earth. Another similar creation story is from Madagascar off Africa, where the first man lived without eating, then indulged himself so much that his legs swelled up and burst, creating a female who was the mother of the race. Interestingly enough, this same legend is told by the Amazon's Yanomami tribe in South America's Amazon. Repeated Amazon, sorry. The previous stories were from South Africa and India, and the correspondence is just amazing. And that's because Blavatsky teaches us that because they were all part of a giant continent called Lemuria. A further example of the second wave of humanity comes from the Greeks, which depicts Zeus, the son of Kronos, who arranges to have his siblings created by slipping a potion into his father's drink, whereby Kronos vomits up Zeus's brothers and sisters. As manifestation proceeds, the start of duality is represented by the combination of the divine feminine and the divine masculine in the hermaphrodite or the royal androgyne, a level of manifestation where there is not yet the development of gender. It's only in potential. Blavatsky defines this as the third root race or wave of humanity. The royal androgyne is illustrated in the Greek myth of Hermaphroditus. So the statue shows the Greek Symmachus pursuing Hermaphroditus, who is son of the Greek god Hermes and the goddess of love, Aphrodite. And the pictures show different angles of the same statue. The story takes place where a spring flows into a beautiful fountain over which the lovely nymph Symmachus presides. A handsome youth, Hermaphroditus, comes to the fountain and is surprised to find it quenches his thirst. As he lays in the cool water, he feels the refreshing quality on his limbs. Because of this, he comes to the fountain daily, which delights the nymph, who falls so in love with the youth, she pleads with the gods to permit her to be joined permanently to her lover. And the gods accept her request, and Hermaphroditus comes forth as half man and half woman. So you can see the marble statue on the left, and the fresco show him as having both genders. And this marks the beginning of Blavatsky's third root race or wave of humanity. In India, there's a corresponding deity of Ardhanarishvara, who is half man and half woman, composed of Shiva and Parvati, split down the middle. And the red skirt shows Parvati, the female, who is Shiva's consort. And Shiva is one of the Hindu trinity of high gods, including Vishnu and Brahma. This next story from the Iroquois Native Americans has many versions that were developed in neighboring geographical areas, but the basic theme remains the same. This story has quite a creative depiction of duality, so I'll share the entire story. In the beginning, there was only a great blue, and sky people lived quietly and happily on an island floating in the sky, and there was no death or sadness. One day, Sky Woman realizes she's going to give birth to twins, and she tells her husband, who flies into a rage and takes her to the center of the island where a giant tree gives out light to all. The man tears up the tree, creating a huge hole in the middle of the island. Curious, the woman peers through. Far below, she sees the waters covering the earth. At that moment, her husband pushes her through the hole and she falls toward the waters below. As Sky Woman falls, two birds see her and catch her on their backs and bring her to the other sea animals. All are determined to help. They dive into the water and bring up mud from the bottom of the sea and spread it on the back of Big Turtle. And the mud begins to grow until it becomes the size of North America. When Sky Woman steps onto the land, she sprinkles dust into the air and creates stars, the moon, and the sky. Soon she gives birth to twin sons, Sapling and Flint, who are opposites. So you can hear again the duality. One child is born the normal way, and the second breaks out of her side so that she dies. So this is just like Eve from Adam's rib. Also, Sky Woman's dying symbolizes the end of that level of manifestation as life proceeds to deeper physicality. And you'll see this dying is very common. The story says that when the divine woman is buried, all the plants of the earth grow from her body. And this depiction is also in other stories around the world. Sapling grows to be kind and gentle, but Flint has a heart as cold as his name. So here the duality in the opposites of life. They begin to fill the earth with their creation. What Sapling creates is good. He makes rivers that flow in two directions. And he makes animals which are useful to humans, like the horse. And into the rivers, he puts fish without bones. And he makes plants that are easy for people to eat. But Flint comes along and destroys Sapling's work. He creates suffering and all that is bad. He puts thorns on berry bushes and makes rivers flow only one way. He puts bones into fish and creates winter, but Sapling brings back life in the spring. Flint creates monsters that his brother drives beneath the earth. Eventually, Sapling and Flint decide they cannot share the earth. They battle, and the bad brother Flint dies. Before he dies, he says, though, that he will go to the far west, where all races of man will follow him when they die. So you may say this is similar to Theosophy's, the astral plane, where it is said we go when we leave our bodies. A parallel story comes from the Tahitian and Samoan creator, Ta Aurora, or Ta Aurora. This picture shows where those islands are in the South Pacific, south of Hawaii. The story, which I'm summarizing, says that Ta Aurora lives in an egg that revolves eternally in dark, empty space. When he breaks out of the egg, he creates the universe, making man and woman out of dirt from the earth. And that's Te and his wife Hina. So these two are very similar to sapling and flint, in that Hina is good, but Te likes to see people suffer. Te curses mankind with fear, while Hina gives hope. Just like the Greeks in Pandora's box with hope at the bottom. In the rest of the story, Te dies and Hina is triumphant, just like the Iroquois story with sapling and flint. And that story is from North America, and this one is from Tahiti, which Blavatsky says was also once ages ago a part of the same continent. Several creation stories have the depiction of heaven and earth being joined together, so the people have to separate them. The Snohomish Native Americans near us say that at first the sky is so close that the people had to bend over to walk. If they stood up straight, they hit their heads on the sky. So all the tribes worked together using poles made from tall trees to push up the sky. The Maori tribe of New Zealand also has a story where the heaven and earth need to be separated. And it starts with Te Po, the nothingness, with no manifestation. It is, so that first one is Te Kore, and then Te Po is the night of darkness. And it's immensely long and dark. Then the sun, the moon, and the earth are made, along with the children who still live in darkness, for their parents are not yet parted. The sky, Rangi, lies on the Mother Earth Papi, and no light nor time has come between them, and the children can neither escape nor see the light. So the children each try to force Rangi and Papi apart, but they all fail. They ask the guardian of war to cut the sinews which bind them together. This makes them bleed and causes the earth to turn red, the sacred color, but it doesn't force them apart. So the children discuss this and say, should we kill our parents so they may be separated? So here again is another killing of the unmanifested as creation takes place. Finally, the fiercest of the children, Tane, steps forward, and very slowly he presses his shoulders against the sky. So gradually, as the kauri tree grows, because time is vast, the pressure makes the earth and the sky yield. The strength of growth will not be stopped. So Rangi, the sky, cries as he is separated from Papi, and this brings about rain, making the earth fertile. 4 poles are placed to hold up the sky. Then the children of the earth who have never known light arise and flourish. So the 4 poles again symbolize the 4 elements and the 4 cardinal points of the earth. The Egyptian story of manifestation also has various versions depending on the location where the myths were passed on, such as Memphis in the top arrow, and Heliopolis is just north of it, or in Thebes, more south, the lower arrow. And the gods had different names, and these were really very confusing. One story describes Kanef, the eternal god of darkness, which is depicted as a snake encircling an egg or a water urn. The snake's head is over the water and his breath incubates it. So you can hear the waters of creation again, as well as the breath, which is very similar to the one breath of Hinduism, the breath of which we all are a part. In other location, it is the god Nehebkau, the primordial serpent god, who is a snake or a dragon depicting the beginning of manifestation in the waters of noon. So you'll see the same snake in other stories. When time is right for manifestation, the creative potential of the world, Atum, creates himself. And it's written that he allows himself to come into being. So this is the center in the white circle. From him comes Ra, the sun god, who is a creator god, but at a lower level of manifestation than Atum. And Ra is the king of the deities. And he corresponds to other gods in various mythologies, like Zeus of the Greeks. So Ra, the sun god, has the sun on his head inside of a cobra. And he looks very similar to Horus, for those of you that are familiar with Egyptian mythology. But Horus is further down in manifestation, being a sun king, or the god of kingship. And Horus has the same head of a falcon, symbolizing royalty, but he has the crown of Egypt on his head instead of the sun. From Ra is created the air god Shu and his sister Tefnut, who create an empty space in the waters of noon. And they were the ones that Ra spits out of his mouth back a little while ago, and these two start duality. They're sister and brother, and they make room for the waters of creation. So Shu and Tefnut become the parents of the earth god Geb and the sky goddess Nut. Because Geb and Nut remain closely united in a perfect embrace, like New Zealand's Poppy and Rongi, they too need to be separated. So Shu, the god of air, lifts up Nut, the sky goddess. So you can see Shu's arms holding up Nut as Geb, the earth god, lies beneath. Again, this is duality and the start of separation of the genders. So in these pictures, the blue stars in sky goddesses Nut's body are easy to see. And the story says that Geb cries over the loss of Nut, and his tears bring about vegetation and living creatures on earth. Nut gives birth to 4 children, Osiris and Isis, and Set and Nephthys. And twins, Osiris and Isis, are the royal androgyne before the separation of the sexes. Osiris takes his sister Isis as his wife and has a child, Horus. And so the statue on the left is Isis breastfeeding Horus, and together they make more humanity. Osiris is killed by his sibling Set, and in the picture on the right, Set, the god of war, is killing the serpent in a battle for kingship, which symbolizes again this killing of the unmanifested as life proceeds on the physical plane. Similar imagery is in the Babylonian and Assyrian epic called the Enuma Elish, and the 7 tablets of creation, and these are in the British Museum. Absu, the god of the underwater seas, is the sweet water sea, and his co-creator is Tiamat, the goddess of the salt sea waters and the dragon creator. And they create many gods between them. Tiamat becomes bothered by all the noise and laughter of her godsons and grandsons. So Absu decides to destroy them so they can have some peace. Some stories say that Absu was worried that his offspring were planning to kill him and take over the throne. So here again, the killing of the higher god. So Absu plans to kill his offspring. This plot is overheard by Apsu's and Tiamat's grandson, Ea, the All-Wise. And so the picture shows Ea's sword from the current video game, modeled after the Enuma Elish, and the sword has Ea's power. And by the way, Ea is the all-wise, and it corresponds with Mahat, the theosophical term for the universal mind. So Ea kills Apsu, the grandfather and the god of the seas, and takes a wife and creates the fearless warrior Marduk. And you can see how this story can have many adventures, which I won't share except this basic thread. Meanwhile, in Tiamat's salt waters, she makes fierce dragons filled with poisons, along with monsters that battle the fairer gods. So this is the good and evil, and they have a struggle here. So Ea commands his son Marduk to slay Tiamat. After a fierce battle, Marduk shoots an arrow into Tiamat, killing her and cutting her in half. One half of Tiamat becomes the heavens and the other half the earth. So here again, the god's body makes the earth. And Tiamat's weeping eyes become the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, making the earth fertile. Then Marduk goes on to create human beings. So the Hindu creation stories has many versions and offshoots. So to summarize it, at first there is the primordial waters in the bosom of the supreme god Vishnu. So you can see Vishnu poised on a lotus leaf in the waters, and Lakshmi, his consort, is massaging his feet. And she's the preserver of the world, and she's known for good luck. So you can see Brahma, the creator god, connected to Vishnu's navel. Brahma makes a woman, Sarasvati, to aid him in his job of creation. So she's the Shakti, or creative energy for manifestation, or Fohat in theosophical terms. In the story, Sarasvati is so beautiful that Brahma becomes infatuated with her and gazes at her wherever she goes. Sarasvati is embarrassed being his daughter and declines his advances. And she tries to turn away from Brahma's gaze, but everywhere she moves, Brahma sprouts another head until he has 4. So this represents the 4 elements as well as the 4 Vedas. They are ancient Hindu texts. To get away, Sarasvati changes her form and becomes every creature on earth. Meanwhile, Lord Shiva is angry at Brahma, and as punishment gives the curse that the creatures of the earth will not know Brahman, the infinite divine or God. So this is seen in our lives with our preoccupation with earth life and ourselves, where we don't remember the divine in all things and people. As a form of repentance, Brahma has been reciting the 4 Vedas, one from each head, since that time. Brahma and Sarasvati are the parents of Manu, the first man. So he's in the boat in the back, along with the 7 sages, and that's the 7 levels of consciousness. And they are being saved by the fish avatar, one of the incarnations of Vishnu. Then Manu marries Sarasvati, his mother, and creates the rest of the human race. Very similar to Isis marrying her brother Osiris. So this is that duality. Moving to China, in the beginning, there was only an egg-shaped chaos called no thing. From this, the earth and sky are created. The yolk of the egg is yin and becomes earth, and the egg white is yang and becomes the sky. Fanku is born from this egg. Fanku has 2 horns and 2 tusks, symbolizing duality. The story goes that the giant Fanku becomes bigger and bigger for 18,000 years and pushes up the sky from the earth. He then sets the sun, moon, and planets in place. Fanku creates the goddess Nuwa, who is a coiled serpent with the head of a goddess. So you can see the snake or serpent again. Fandu creates a god for Nuwa so she can have someone to talk to. And this is her brother Fushi. So the duality shown in the intertwined tails. And this is also seen in the Astana graves pictures where both are coiled serpents. So Nuwa goes to the Yellow River and out of the earth sculpts a human being. She breathes life into it, like God making Adam, and makes several more. And she realizes she can make them faster, but by putting a stick in the earth and shaking it off. So this creates all the people of the land, but it is said that the most intelligent people are shaped by Nuwa's own hands. So the Icelandic and Norse creation story is also extremely involved. So in summary, out of nothingness comes a northern land of Niflheim with freezing fog, ice, and snow. Out of the south comes Muspel, which is fiery hot with rivers full of poison. So these again show the duality. The warm air from Muspel blows and melts the ice of Niflheim. And out of the ice comes the giant Ymir, the roarer. And he's hungry and thirsty, so he roars, and out of the ice comes the cow, Adumla. By the way, another version of this myth has Ymir sleeping, and from under his arm exudes Adumla, the cow, similar to Eve coming from Adam's rib or budding, and that's the first root race. Ymir drinks Adumla's milk and is satisfied. And Adumla's warm breath causes another shape to emerge called Buri, the first king of heaven, who with his female Besla begets Bor. Now Bor goes on to have 3 sons, and that's the Trinity. And the first is Odin, the mightiest god of all. As I said, there are many stories with this gods, and you can see how the progression could be with that, but the progression is to more physical manifestation. Odin, with the help of his brothers, kills his father, the evil giant Ymir. So here again, the killing of the unmanifested. To make people, the story's really creative in that Odin finds an ash and an elm tree that have fallen down, and he breathes life into them, and they're called Ask and Embla. And out of these come the entire human race. At the heart of the Norse universe is an enormous ash tree called the Yggdrasil tree, and is composed of the heaven worlds, the Asgard, and that's the home of the gods at the top. And then Midgard, our earth, where we are, and then Niflheim, the underworld. So this ends my summarized North legend, but to show you another tree of life, which is similar to the Norse one, the Mayan tree of life comes from southern Mexico and northern Central America. And then 4,000 years later, the Aztecs have a similar creation story, and their creator god is Ometeotl in the dark, watery void. So I'm only going to show you the gods so that you can see the similarity. And he brings forth the dragon serpent Sipakli, whose body is used to create the earth. From there comes two gods who are husband and wife and have 4 sons, one of which is the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, the god of light, who brings forth further manifestation. So there's such a similarity in all of these. So Greek mythology has an exquisite story of how human beings are given our self-awareness. So this is in the 3rd root race, or the wave of humanity. And Blavatsky teaches us that divine angelic beings called Manasaputras incarnate into humans to give us our intellect. As other myths, the story starts with the dark nothingness. Then out of that, light comes, and Uranus is created, the sky god, who pairs with Gaia, the earth goddess. And they make Zeus the king of the gods. And he's supposed to create the creatures of the earth, but he passes that job to his 2 sons, Prometheus and Epimetheus. So you can see these various stages of deeper manifestation in these levels of the gods. So Prometheus is to create human beings, and Epimetheus will make animals. Epimetheus gives each creature a gift, such as the speed and agility of the gazelles, but he makes a mistake and uses up all the gifts. So Prometheus doesn't have one to give the human beings. However, clever Prometheus knows that in order for humans to survive, they need intelligence. To accomplish this, since there are no gifts left, he decides to capture the spark of the sacred fire from Zeus on Mount Olympus. He succeeds, but Zeus is furious and sentences Prometheus to eternal torment by being chained to a rock, where each day an eagle, the emblem of Zeus, eats Prometheus's liver, which grows back overnight to be eaten once again by the eagle the next day. Eventually in the story, Prometheus is freed by the hero Heracles. Getting sacred fire, or our minds, is also depicted in the Christian story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. I'm just summarizing it, but you've seen how God makes Eve from Adam's rib, and God tells both of them, you may eat from every tree except the tree of knowledge and good and evil. So this is the knowledge of the duality, or the ways of life that take place on earth. And the verse goes on, for if you eat of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall die. So in the garden, the serpent, who is commonly a symbol of wisdom, tempts Eve with the forbidden fruit, but he promises her that if she and Adam eat of it, they will not die but be immortal, meaning that we have our immortality in our higher selves. So Adam and Eve create the rest of humanity. So in closing, I'd like to share with you some beautiful lines from the story of Karahan from Turkey and Mongolia, because the wording is so poetic. And it speaks of endless water reaching to the 4 corners of nothingness. So here is 4 again. And in silence flies the gander, the god Karahan. And the gander flies without stopping or resting. And so this is the eternal motion that Blavatsky teaches is an aspect of the one life. As manifestation begins, Karahan trembles in his flight. And this churns up the water so that it swells and folds upon itself darkly. Will time come to free him from his flight? So time is only manifest on the physical plane. As creation begins, the waters shiver and time trembles. Water and time crush emptiness between them. I just think these are so poetic. Then there are two geese flying in the joy of endless being. The story continues with the second goose, Erkishi, plummeting down into the waters with deadly time trapped in his feathers. As he tries to soar back up, Karahan takes the flight from his wings. And then as rock and lamb are formed, the poem says, eternity sucks the water down to give earth room. And the epic continues with all of the creation. And you can hear the beauty in the words. So in summary, you can see how Blavatsky's palm leaf manuscript corresponds with the great nothingness and the endless waters. Then comes the start of creation with the light. Then next we have duality. And finally, human beings, as we are given our minds. So our challenge is to continue and move forward with evolution and progress to becoming the spiritual beings we started out from. Thank you.